In Plato's dialogue Crito, we find Socrates' friend admonishing him for refusing to evade his death sentence by escaping prison. In the course of Crito's argument, he repeatedly appeals to the majority. He makes the case that the majority would believe Socrates is fully justified in taking advantage of the opportunity to escape punishment. Yet Socrates responds that majority opinion is entirely irrelevant to this question. In fact, not only does majority opinion not carry with it any special authority, neither should the power the majority can wield against its opponents receive any consideration either. But Crito pleads to the contrary that the majority is capable of perpetuating the greatest harms. The majority could rob Socrates of his property, force him into exile, or, as in the present case, even kill him. On the surface, none of the claims Crito makes here seem very controversial. Majorities can harm and have harmed those who oppose them in myriad ways. Yet, Socrates denies this claim, or at least he denies the claim that the majority can do him the greatest harm. In this video, we will explore and scrutinize this idea. Why does Socrates believe he has nothing to fear from the majority? What exactly does the majority lack which renders them incapable of perpetuating the greatest harm? And what in the first place qualifies some harm as the greatest? Let's begin by examining the passage where Socrates denies that the majority can do him the greatest harm. Socrates tells Crito, "I only wish that the majority could do the very worst things. Then they might also be able to do the very best ones, and everything would be fine." It must be admitted that there is some sarcasm in this statement. However, it does also make a serious philosophical point. The sarcasm comes from its underlying implication. Wouldn't it be great if the majority really was capable of doing the greatest harm? Then we would be dealing with an opponent that has at least a minimal degree of competency. However, Socrates jests, this is not a worry that we need to take seriously. Still, underneath this insult is a substantive claim about the relationship between harm, benefit, and expertise. The ability to benefit and the ability to harm are tied together. Only those with the ability to do the greatest benefits can also do the greatest harms. It is not the incompetent bunglers that we should fear the most. No, our greatest fear should be directed toward highly capable experts. It is only these sorts of people, it would seem, who can do us any real harm. This point is spelled out further in the rest of the passage. Socrates explains to Crito that, as it is, the majority can do neither, since they can't make someone either wise or unwise. The effects they produce are really the result of chance. The majority is not composed of knowledgeable and wise experts. As such, the majority can only act by chance. In Socrates' view, this prevents them from posing any real threat. It is crucial to appreciate the force of Socrates' claim here. Again, he does not deny that the majority can exile someone or kill them, and yet despite this, Socrates still believes that the majority cannot cause the greatest harm. But how could that be the case? What sort of greater harm than exile or death does Socrates have in mind here? More fundamentally, what determines the magnitude of a harm? Answering these questions requires a closer look at the present passage. On close examination, we can see Socrates make some suggestions about 1. What it is that determines the degree to which some action is harmful or beneficial, and 2. The manner in which actions that cause the greatest harm or benefit are caused or come about. First, recall that Socrates claims the majority can do neither the greatest harm nor the greatest benefit, because the majority can't make someone either wise or unwise. This statement presupposes a particular view about what constitutes human flourishing. Evidently, for Socrates at least, one significant part of what makes a human life go well must be the pursuit of wisdom. Our lives go well as we grow in wisdom, and our lives go poorly to the extent that we are ignorant and lack wisdom. Given this, it follows that, since the majority cannot make a person either wise or unwise, the majority cannot harm or benefit another person in any genuine sense. Whatever else the majority can do to us, they can neither rob us of our wisdom nor grant us any wisdom. But why is it exactly that the majority cannot make anyone wise or unwise? Ultimately, it is because the majority lack wisdom themselves. Again, because the majority lacks knowledge and wisdom, whatever the majority does is the result of chance. They act at random without proper rational deliberation, and consequently, the majority is necessarily incapable of wisdom. Because Socrates is skeptical of majority opinion, and of the idea that majorities act rationally, it is only natural to think that he would also believe majorities act chaotically and produce results by chance. Yet, even if that is true, why does this prevent the majority from inflicting the greatest harm? Why can't the greatest harm be the result of chance? After all, isn't random destruction possible? Consider again the example we discussed in the main lecture. Does it take an automobile expert to damage a car? At first glance, it seems that someone without any knowledge of automobile maintenance at all could do a great deal of damage to a car, and to the point they could do so entirely and completely at random, provided they had a sledgehammer or some other implement of destruction. We don't seem to need any complicated or elaborate explanation for how it is possible for non-experts to cause great destruction. So, we are still left wondering, why does Socrates think that unwise, unthinking, and even irrational majorities pose no threat of serious harm? It is important to recognize that Socrates doesn't claim that those who lack expert knowledge cannot cause any harm at all. Socrates wouldn't deny that a know-nothing with a sledgehammer can cause significant damage of a certain kind. Rather, the point Socrates makes is that such a person cannot do the greatest harm. If we keep this in mind, then the claim Socrates makes here begins to make more sense. We should notice that in the case of someone attacking a car with a sledgehammer, the amount of harm that can be caused is inherently limited. If I smash my enemy's automobile, he will be harmed by being rendered incapable of using his vehicle. But it will also be obvious that there's something wrong. He will not be tempted to go for a drive that day. Now compare this with the kind of harm an expert is capable of. An expert may be able to make a car dangerous to use without that danger being easily detected, perhaps by ensuring that the brakes will malfunction after it is already on the road. This is not something that can be done by a non-expert. There is harm that can be produced by chance, but maybe not the greatest harm. Producing the highest degree of harm requires more sophisticated knowledge and understanding. The most substantial harm is often perpetuated by those with great knowledge against those who suffer the vulnerability of ignorance. Now, let's consider how this might occur in the domain which concerns us at present, the domain of human flourishing. If Socrates is correct, then only an expert in human flourishing, who possessed mastery knowledge of what it means to live a good human life, could do both the greatest good and the greatest harm within that domain. It is easy to understand how such a person would be best equipped to positively impact human flourishing. Presumably, such an individual could teach others about what a good human life consists in and endeavor to train others to pursue such a life. But why would this individual also be capable of doing the greatest harm to human flourishing? Perhaps by way of deception, just like how an automobile expert could also produce the greatest harms to drivers. If someone is an expert in human flourishing, then they would presumably be well versed in the various arguments pertaining to what constitutes the ultimate human good. Such a person would be able to outline in a convincing fashion the arguments given by those who think that human flourishing is found in a life of pleasure, wealth, honor, fame, or reputation, even if, like Socrates, the expert did not agree with any of these arguments. After all, understanding these arguments is required for understanding where they ultimately fall short, and furthermore, for being able to identify the true source of human flourishing. It is precisely because of the expert's knowledge, then, that he is able to convince others of a mistaken conception of what it means to live well. And in fact, he may be better suited for this than those who honestly advocate for a mistaken point of view. Assume, for the sake of argument, that hedonism, the view which holds that our well-being is determined by the amount of pleasure in our lives, assume that view is false. This implies that someone who advocates for this view, even if they have thought and reasoned about the matter a great deal, must be missing something, otherwise they wouldn't be mistaken. Whoever believes something false must be blind to certain weaknesses in their perspective, weaknesses which, by contrast, the expert in human flourishing, having complete knowledge of the human good, would recognize. This recognition would consequently give the moral expert greater ability to anticipate those weaknesses and persuasively, if not soundly, argue for a false conception of what it means to live well. In fact, such an individual would be uniquely positioned to do precisely what Socrates has been accused of doing, corrupting the youth. This, at least hypothetically, is why we might have more to fear from experts than from the majority. But what does it mean to say that the moral expert is capable of corrupting those around them? Is this really a possibility? More specifically, is it really possible for someone to be a moral expert and simultaneously engage in moral corruption? This issue gets at the question of whether expertise is value neutral. Does the process of becoming an expert in any way inhibit one's willingness to use that expertise for bad and corrupt purposes? How we answer this question may depend upon the type of expertise in question. In many cases, it does seem like expertise is value neutral. Someone with expertise in engineering could, for instance, use their knowledge to cut corners in a way that most people would not readily detect. An expert in medicine could, hypothetically, authorize unneeded procedures merely for the sake of personal profit. We would, of course, have many criticisms of such individuals. Yet we cannot really say that they do not qualify as experts in their respective fields. And this is because being an engineering or medical expert does not in itself require knowledge of morality or the practice of virtue. One can use engineering or medical expertise for good purposes that improve society, or one can put that same knowledge to bad purposes that harm society. The process of gaining such knowledge does not necessarily have a positive influence upon one's moral character. But is the same true of moral expertise? Is it possible for someone to become a moral expert without thereby also developing a virtuous moral character? Plato would answer no to this question. This is because Plato believed knowledge of the good, unlike other kinds of technical expertise, is not purely intellectual. If someone claimed to understand what is good for human beings, but also decided to intentionally do something evil, then in Plato's view, that would give us grounds for questioning whether this person ever really understood the human good in the first place. We should, that is, look upon the person who lives an immoral life and also claims to be a moral expert with great suspicion. Can they really be a moral expert if their purported moral knowledge has no effect on their behavior? And in fact, while the connection between expertise, action, and character would seem to be closest in the domain of moral expertise, there's probably a similar, even if weaker, kind of connection in technical expertise as well. Yes, we can imagine people using their technical expertise for evil ends, and such people have existed. Still, this is far from the norm. In most cases, the process of attaining expertise should give one greater respect for the function and purpose of that field, and make one more sensitive to the responsibility they have for the well-being of other people. While there are always exceptions, the general tendency of the process of becoming an expert will hopefully be to make experts more concerned with using their knowledge in a virtuous way. In Plato's Crito, the experts, moral experts in particular, are valorized, while the standing of the unthinking, chaotic majority is diminished. The mob may believe themselves capable of doing the greatest harm to their enemies, but that is only because they have such a poor understanding of what actually matters in life. They can destroy Socrates' body, but they can never tarnish his moral character. And with any luck, the experts, those who hypothetically are capable of the greatest harm, will undergo a significant transformation through the process of gaining their expertise. A transformation that causes them to feel the weight of responsibility and imparts the desire to use their expertise in accordance with virtue and for the good of society.